clouds are falling and I'm running out of breath. Keep me in your heart for a while. If I leave you, it doesn't mean I love you any less. Keep me in your heart for a while. When you get up in the morning and you see that crazy sun, keep me in your heart for a while. There's a train leaving nightly called when all is said and done. Keep me in your heart for a while. Sha-la-la-la-la-la-la-la-la. Keep me in your heart for a while. Sha-la-la-la-la-la-la-la. Keep me in your heart for a while. Sometimes when you're doing simple things around the house, maybe you'll think of me and smile. You know I'm tied to you like the buttons on your blouse. Keep me in your heart for a while. Hold me in your thoughts.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming. We are going to get started in just a moment. So I know there are a few people grabbing drinks, so I'll just let everyone grab a drink, take a seat, and then we'll get started. I'm also saying this partly for the benefit of everyone who's online. If you can see and hear me and you are on Zoom right now, thank you so much for joining virtually, and we'll get started momentarily.
Wheels keep turning, but they're running out of steam. Keep me in your heart for a while. Sha-la-la-la-la-la-la-la-la. Keep me in your heart for a while. Sha-la-la-la-la-la-la-la. Keep me in your heart for a while.
Here comes the sun, doo-doo-doo. Here comes the sun, and I say it's alright. Little darling, it's been a long, cold, lonely winter. Little darling, it seems like years since it's been here. But here comes the sun, doo-doo-doo. Here comes the sun, and I say it's alright. Little darling, the smiles returning to the faces. Little darling, it feels like years since it's been here. But here comes the sun, doo-doo-doo. Here comes the sun, and I say it's alright. melting. Little darling, it seems like years since it's been clear. Here comes the sun, doo-doo-doo. Here comes the sun, and I say it's alright. Here comes the sun, doo-doo-doo. Here comes the sun, I say it's alright.
Okay. Still not on? Got a little more volume. Yeah, that's not a good sign. Let's see. Okay, there we go. Thank you all so much for coming here today, especially in the moment that we're in and with everything being so difficult. Thank you guys so much for joining us online. I don't know where I'm gonna be like Joe Biden, look at the camera. If you're joining us online, thank you so much for joining us online, and thank you all for being here in person as well. Please do keep masks on if you step away from your table. The last thing we want in the world is to put anyone at risk, so thank you so much for understanding that. At your tables, you see some yellow pads in Bic pens. If you worked with my dad, this needs no explanation. If you did not work with my dad, all that you need to know is my dad had a mind like Da Vinci, but rather than working on scrolls and with inkwell pens, he worked on yellow legal pads with Bic pen. And if you've ever seen Da Vinci's drawings, they aren't too dissimilar from my dad's. Kind of Jackson Pollock-y, abstract, expressionist, messy art, all in their own right. And if you feel moved to share a story and you don't want to come up and share it or stand up and share it, feel free to use the pen and paper and then just drop it off at our table. But if you would like to stand up and speak, please, please, please feel welcome to. No pressure. If you want to say one sentence or tell a story, anything that you would like to share, we would love to hear. If you don't know, today would have been my dad's 70th birthday. And I cannot think of a better way to celebrate his life than by being here with all of you sharing stories. So thank you so much. Okay. I do have waterproof mascara on, but it's not working, so just pretend that it is. So all daughters and fathers have a pretty special relationship. Dads tend to, thank you. Dads tend to make daughters feel safe, sheltered, and cared for. And of course, my dad did all of that, but part of what made my dad so special to me is that he always made me feel smart, capable, strong, brave, and helped me feel independent, which not a lot of girls get to feel when they're young, especially in the era, the 80s, oh my God, so long ago, when I was growing up. But my dad shaped my worldview more than anyone else in my life. He set the bar of what it means to be a good person, and I know that I will spend the rest of my life trying to live up to his standard. He was an extremely compassionate and generous person. He lived his life entirely based on love, and he would help anyone he could at any time in any way he could. You never even had to ask, let alone ask twice. Goodness and kindness were instinct to him. His choices were always dictated by how he could provide assistance and make others happy. Kindness and love permeated every single action that he ever took. And anyone who met him could testify to this. In the outpouring of messages and emails and texts and calls that we've been receiving from everyone, they talk about two things: how kind he was and how smart he was. And we'll get to him being smart later, but he was just so, so kind. He didn't have an unkind bone in his body. And because of this, he challenged us all to be kinder, more loving, and more empathetic. He was kind without judgment and always acted under the assumption that everyone was always doing their version of their best. And he never judged anyone else's struggle. If he saw a person experiencing homelessness or a flower vendor on the side of the freeway, without hesitation, he would buy something, give them food, give them money. He tipped to embarrassing degrees, giving 20s to Girl Scouts, just inappropriate levels of tipping. But it was because he knew that that was one way he could help, so he did. He literally gave money to every single person who came to our front door. No matter what they were selling, whether or not we needed it, the person walked away having made a sale. We used to tease him that he was the easiest person in the world to sell something to. Of course, he also acted with love and empathy. He donated to charities regularly, and particularly the ACLU. He was a champion of the oppressed, a champion of the marginalized, and always worked to make life better for those that were vulnerable and on the margins. His empathy kept him politically active until the day that he passed. He was always very, very happy. Even in situations that were really difficult or sad, he was relentlessly optimistic. He was always ready to laugh and find light. Just recently, at the beginning of the year, my mom was in the hospital for 5 weeks in January, and my dad and I, this was pre-COVID, were there every day, sitting there by her bedside. And to keep things light, we were trying Snapchat filters on each other, all day, every day, and he would laugh at them and try things and called me an idiot, and it was just I have a video of him with the puppy dog ears going, "Kristen, you are such an idiot." It's my favorite video. I love it. I will save it forever. But he just could find moments to laugh even when things were really difficult. He could get anyone through any crisis. I know that a lot of people in this room went to him for help getting through difficult moments and crises. And there's a saying that a stormy sea never made a skilled sailor. And my dad had more than his share of difficulties throughout his life, and it just made him a competent and caring person. And through all of his difficulties, he always remained positive and hopeful. He would have fun with more reckless abandonment than anyone else I've ever known in my entire life. At every party, at every holiday, during Halloween, Christmas, and especially birthdays, he would always be the one laughing the loudest, having the most fun, cheering, clapping. One of his favorite things to do was to give out candy on Halloween to the trick-or-treaters. He would hear the doorbell ring, the first doorbell ring of the night, and would basically go, "Oh, goody," and would run up to the front door with a bowl of candy. And whatever the kid was dressed as, he would talk to them in character. So he would be like, "Oh, Batman, you fighting crime tonight?" Or, "Dorothy, where's Toto?" He would just have fun with all the kids and just loved carving pumpkins and looking at Christmas trees and talking about how we were so lucky to have such a tall Christmas tree, and aren't we lucky to have so many presents under the Christmas tree, and just really, really soak up the joy of every single moment he was alive. And I don't know anyone else who could make such a fuss about a homemade cake. He loved baking. He loved my baking, I should say. He did not bake himself. And just loved treats and sweets and desserts. In fact, every time we came here to Summit House quite regularly for Thanksgiving, and I think Thanksgiving pie was what he lived for. So I'll be having pie in his memory this year. Some of my favorite memories of my dad are our Disneyland trips together when Eric and I were kids. At the park, it sounds like a weird thing to get emotional about, but it's just, when we would run into the park, go on roller coasters, he would scream so loudly so that Eric and I knew what it was like to have fun. Like on Splash Mountain, before you go over the drop, he would yell, "Oh no!" so that Eric and I would scream and have fun. And in every picture, like when Splash Mountain takes that automatic picture of you, my dad would be like a child, like giddy, and I would look terrified, and Eric would be doing his best to affect bravery and have like a totally still face. But he was terrified, I know he was. And every time we went to Disneyland, we were there the whole day, and the day always ended in sitting on Main Street and watching the Electric Light Parade. And he would watch those parades with awe and wonder in a way that helped me instill in me a sense of wonder for the world and an ability to suspend my disbelief and enjoy magic. And that is such a gift to instill in a child. He told amazing stories. He might be one of the best storytellers that ever lived. He understood how to build suspense and pull heartstrings, really craft a narrative. I think most of his stories were true, but I'm really not sure. There's a book and a movie called Big Fish, and if you've seen it, you'll understand that that's a lot like what my dad was like. The stories my dad would tell were just borderline too ridiculous to be true, but then I think they were. I really don't know. I don't know. But my dad loved that movie because I think he related to that character of this dad who's like always telling his kids these tall, epic tales, and there's always a lesson to them, and the line between fact and fiction is thin and twisty-turvy, but the essence of the story is what my dad always wanted you to take away. There's a line in that movie where he says, "It doesn't matter whether or not you believe it. What you need to do is believe in it." And that's the magic of so many of the stories my dad told. Another great line in that movie my dad loved was, "You spend years trying to corrupt and mislead your children, fill their head with nonsense, and still somehow they turn out perfectly fine." And for the first 7 years of my life, I believed that Eric and I had an older brother and sister that my dad ate. He told us when Eric and I wouldn't clean our rooms that Eric and I were actually the third and fourth kids, and that we had an older brother and sister, but they wouldn't clean their rooms, so he ate them. And when our rooms would be dirty, he would run in there and go, "Do you see these teeth? They ate your brother and sister. Clean your room." So I'm pretty sure I told people at school that I had an older brother and sister my dad ate. I don't know when I stopped believing that, but it was way too old. So he had a really vivid imagination, a really, really vivid imagination. And he was well and truly a creative thinker and a Renaissance man in the old sense of the word, and that he was someone that understood and knew science and art and literature and math. He was just a well and truly brilliant man. My own love for the arts and humanities are largely attributed to weekend trips to the museums. Almost every weekend we went somewhere and did something. And we went to science museums and art museums, aquariums, and we would read all the didactic information. I was like an ideal museum visitor. Would read everything and try to learn something and walk away with not only good memories, but really having understood something new for the first time. I attribute whatever skills I have as a writer almost entirely to my dad. He devoted all of his nights when I was in high school, sitting down with me and walking through my essays and every single piece of writing, sentence by sentence, explaining to me how to make it clearer, more effective, stronger, and just better. And anyone who's ever worked with him knows how he would mark up a piece of writing. My God, the damage that he could do with a Bic pen to a single piece of writing, but it always made it better. And his intelligence really cannot be overstated. Like I said, people who have been writing to us talk about two things: how kind he was and how smart he was. I saw Facebook posts from people who he went to high school with, who he probably hasn't spoken to since he was in high school. All of them were saying he was a genius. Like, he really, really was, in no sense of irony, a true, true genius. His intelligence cannot be exaggerated. You could ask him any question about how far is the moon from Earth? How far is Pluto from the moon? What's the circumference of Pluto? And he would know it, like, pretty close. He would maybe be a little off, but he'd be pretty close. And he attributed this encyclopedic knowledge to reading the newspaper cover to cover every day. He read really avidly. He read everything: novels, nonfiction, the newspaper, magazines. He just drank up knowledge and somehow retained almost all of it. One of my last afternoons with my dad was sitting, COVID era, we were sitting outside, talking about how loud blue whales are. It's such a strange thing, but if you don't know, blue whales are the second loudest animal on the planet. They have a cry of 188 decibels. And when I said this out loud to my dad, he said, "I think that's louder than a rocket launch. Look up how loud a rocket launch is." So I did, and he was right. A rocket launch is 98 decibels. He just knew these things. And even though he was an extremely brilliant man, he was well and truly humble. He had no patience for snobbery. He never took himself too seriously. He would never put on airs. And yes, I'm going to talk about his farts again. He wouldn't even hold his farts in. And he had no shame about it at all. In fact, I'm going to wager that 80% of the people in this room and on Zoom know exactly what my dad's farts sound like. They were really loud and sounded forceful. But he would always say, "Well, it hurts if you hold it in," or "I wouldn't even hold it for the Pope." And sometimes this made for kind of embarrassing situations. One of my favorite stories to tell about my dad's farts is when I was at the Claire's. I don't know if you guys know the accessory store Claire's, but at Claire's, they also did ear piercing. And there was a girl sitting on a stool, unfortunately butthole height, waiting to get her ears pierced. And my dad farted in her face and she started to cry right before she was about to get her ears pierced. It was probably one of the most embarrassing moments of my life, but also something that I will think about and laugh about forever. Another example of how my dad had no patience for snobbery and didn't like formality very much. At our wedding dinner tasting, menu tasting, Tom, my mom, and I had this beautiful wedding venue. You go in for like a fancy tasting a few weeks before and like pick the menu, and they talk about like tasting notes, and it's very like kind of snobby, a little snobby. And my dad was just not there for it. He was just like not gonna like taste something and talk about the notes. And he was enjoying the drinks though, for sure. And towards the end of it, he kind of started getting a little bit sleepy, and they served us polenta, and with his eyes closed, he took a bite of it and went, "These are the worst mashed potatoes I've ever had in my life." It's just an example of how he never took anything all that seriously, really. And he was tireless. He worked harder and more tirelessly for his family and for his business than was even humanly possible. The whole time that I was in high school, I was part of a ballet school, and I would rehearse late until like 10 p.m. at night. And every single night at 10 p.m., I'd walk outside of the studio, and my dad would be waiting there in his car. He would drive me home. He would make me dinner. We would talk about our days. We'd go through my essays. Sometimes he went back to work after that. Sometimes he went to bed. But when I woke up in the morning, he was always awake before me, either working out or already back at work. I don't think he slept. I think he got by in maybe 3 hours of sleep at night. He used up every hour that he was given. He was brave. He never had to feign or fake being brave. I don't think he even had a healthy level of fear. There was one time when he thought we had a home intruder when I was very little, and he broke an upstairs window and threw me out of the window on the roof, and Eric and my mom, and he took a fire poker and ran downstairs, I'm gonna swear, saying, "I'm gonna fucking kill you!" Just with a fire poker, running downstairs thinking there was someone in the house trying to kill us. He just acted instinctively from a truly, truly brave and fearless place. Again, the only things he was really afraid of were beehives, grizzly bears, hippos, and zombies. And zombies came after he saw I Am Legend. Up until that, he was not afraid of zombies. Oh, and tidal waves. Tidal waves. He was kind of afraid of tidal waves. He was extremely patient. He never really got mad at us, except for when we didn't clean our rooms. There was this horrible pet lizard that Eric had that was the ugliest, meanest. I heard Robert laughing. You know that Gollum, this horrible, disgusting pet lizard that when you looked in its cage, it would be it wanted to kill you. And when Eric and I didn't clean our rooms one day, my dad put his thumb in Gollum's tank, and Gollum bit his thumb. And my dad ran around the house with Gollum hanging off his thumb, going, "Clean your rooms or I'm gonna sick Gollum on you." I think that was maybe the angriest I ever saw him, when we wouldn't clean our rooms. But other than cleaning our rooms, he had boundless patience for Eric and I. Eric tested it more than I did, I will say that, and I think that's fair, right? Yeah. But he never yelled at us. He never got mad at us. The one time I did something wrong was when I came home later than I was supposed to after a night at Disneyland with my friend Melanie. And my dad was sitting on the stairs. He didn't yell at me. He didn't lecture me. He just said, "I was worried about you. Please don't do it again." And I didn't. And that was the closest I ever felt to my dad actually being really angry at me. Love was my dad's North Star. He navigated his life by following its light. His love for his family, and especially for my mom, was limitless. He loved my mom in such a truly romantic way. He talked about her to everyone and referred to her as his one love. The inside of his wedding ring had the inscription, "One Love," in their wedding date. He considered her to be the most beautiful woman that ever lived and constantly talked about her in this regard. He said to me on multiple occasions, "Kristen, I love your mom more than anyone loves anyone." And he set the standard for what romantic love looked like. It was patient, constant, unconditional, and true. Eric and I and my mom never had to doubt whether or not my dad loved us. We always knew. Whenever I would say, "I love you" to my dad, he would pat me on the head and rub my nose and say, "I know, I love you too." So while my dad is many things, and while he was definitely a study in juxtaposition, he is undoubtedly my hero, and he was my most influential teacher. He taught me it's possible to be your own kind of person, that you don't need to fit anyone else's idea of who or what you should be, that you should be constantly breaking a mold. He taught me to stay curious, to continue asking questions, to seek to understand, and that life is best lived when you're constantly learning. He taught me to love what you do and to care about what you do and to care for people that work with you and to care for people that work alongside you. And when you work hard, it will always be rewarding. He taught me to travel the world with an open mind and a sense of deference for culture. He taught me that pictures aren't worth anything unless they have people in them, to value experiences over things. He taught me to love accepting a good challenge and good competition. Unfortunately, he did not teach me how to lose graciously. He taught me to love and marvel nature. He loved the ocean, he loved the tropics. He would never fail to remark on a beautiful sky, a beautiful sunset, a beautiful day. That the closest you could possibly be to something like a god is on the top of a mountain or near the sea. And by example, he taught me that to love someone completely, to love them unconditionally and without judgment, that you don't love someone for their strengths in spite of their weaknesses, but that you love someone for their strengths and their weaknesses. Because these factors are what make the person who they are. And that with that understanding, love isn't work, but it's an adventure. And he taught us to love and seek good adventures. I will be learning from my dad the rest of my life. And knowingly or unknowingly, he finally taught me to live without him. I miss him so deeply. But throughout my life, he always made me feel smart, strong, capable, and independent. And he's left me with more memories and wisdoms that I can possibly fit into a single afternoon. I will be pulling on those memories and lessons for the rest of my life. The idea of him is enough for the rest of my life. I am so lucky to have had him as my teacher, and I am so lucky to have had him as my dad. And I will love him completely, forever. There is a short video with photos. So if you can't see the screen, please feel free to move somewhere that you can. And then after that, I'll explain how we'll be sharing stories. Thank you so much. So the way that we'll work the sharing of stories is that we do have some people on Zoom, at least one person, my dad's cousin Jim, who would like to share a story. But if you're on Zoom, use the chat feature to let Cameron is our AV pro, let Cameron know that you would like to speak, and then he'll text me, and I'll make sure to say your name, and we'll transfer over to Zoom. Here in the room, if you'd like to come speak up here, you're welcome to do that. Otherwise, I can bring you a microphone to your table. So I know right away that Trevor Levine would like to speak. Trevor, I don't know where in the room you are, but would you like to come up here? Okay.
So I've known Lee and Kathy for my entire life. Eric and I have been friends essentially since birth. As such, I regard the Anthonys as family. Lee was a devoted family man, businessman, empathetic to the plight of others, and by all outward appearances, a normal, docile human being. But if you threatened him or his family, he could unleash a savagery that would make a grizzly bear proud. One could also tap into his wild side via sufficient lubrication via libations or the occasional controlled substance. Probably the best way to remember Lee is with numerous stories that he left us with, and Lee would light up with prideful amusement anytime he or someone else would tell a story about him. So I'm going to tell a few stories. Just for reference, some of the guilty parties are here. Dad, raise your hand, please. Ed, where are you at? He's hiding. All right, cool. So when Eric and I were children, our fathers would get us together for an annual camping trip into the Southern California mountains. It seems like a harmless endeavor until you realize that my dad was the only one considered to have common sense in that group, and my mom has stated that common sense is not my father's strong point. There was a time that Lee nearly blinded me on the mountain because he was trying to break a stick in half to make a walking stick for young Eric. As the stick and Lee battled, the stick finally relented. I happened to be seated on a log close enough, and I got a walking stick in the eye. Luckily, no serious harm done. Another great time on the mountain was also a product of our father's collective wisdom. Since it had never ever rained once in all their years of hiking and camping, it was decided that rain gear was a heavy luxury to take with us. As luck, or Levine luck would have it, as Lee would call it, it not only rained, but it poured and hailed, and there were abundant lightning strikes. We got caught by the storm at the worst possible time, on a mountain peak devoid of trees and cover. First it hailed, which hurt, by the way. At least our fathers had enough wisdom to start shepherding their 7- and 8-year-old children down the mountain. On the way down, the trail crossed a high ridge with steep slopes, and as you guessed it, still no trees. Because of the steepness of the trail, we were carefully placing our steps until a lightning bolt struck a nearby tree further down the mountain. There was a flash followed by an instant loud explosion. Yeah, it was close. Lee, realizing the imminent danger we were all in, yelled, "Run for your lives." And a scene reminiscent of a buffalo stampede, adult and child alike charged headlong down the steep path in a desperate attempt to outrun something that travels at the speed of light. My dad was in front of me, and with all the jostling of his running, his sleeping bag dropped out of his pack and onto the trail. I'm going to describe this backpack to you. It's a 70s era external frame backpack. The external frame is made of bare aluminum, which perfectly reflected the light of nearby lightning strikes. My dad, realizing his pack was suddenly 5 pounds lighter, stopped to retrieve the sleeping bag. I stopped with him until I felt a strong push in the back from Lee, who had come up from behind us. Pushing me back into a run down the trail, Lee said, "Trevor, keep moving, your father's a goner." After all of that, Ed and Lee decided that the best place to shelter us so Lee could go back and see if my dad was indeed dead was under the only tree on the whole ridgeline. I could see some of the moms shaking their head in disbelief, but I can assure you that this story is at least 90% true. Lee was a fighter, and the exploits from his youth are legendary. Lee tried to imbue these attributes into young Eric and I. One day, in the side yard of Old Morning Glory, Eric and I were unleashed against each other, with both Lee and Dad cheering from the sidelines, behaving as if they were watching a cockfight in TJ. Eric and I beat the crap out of each other, and we were crying in our father's arms by the end of it, but luckily all the markings were covered by clothing and could be concealed from our moms. Lee never shied away from a fight, and another night of drunken shenanigans, I challenged him to a wrestling match in the backyard. Despite losing, age had finally taken its toll on him, and being in an inescapable chokehold, Lee would not surrender and resigned himself to losing consciousness. 2 weeks before he passed away, Lee and I were drunk again, and we jokingly challenged each other to a match in the backyard. I challenged him to a match in the backyard. He told me that he could never fight me because our fighting capability had gotten to the point where, to win, he would have to hurt me, and he could never bring himself to hurt me because he loved me. Later that night, as I prepared to go home, he asked, "We're cool, right?" I told him I was just messing with him, and he scratched his head vigorously as he laughed. Lee, thanks for the stories and the memories. Thanks for being a friend to my dad and to being a loving figure in my life. You will be missed, but rest assured we'll continue telling your stories.
And then Bob Levine, I know if you'd like to speak next. And then Melanie, do you want to go after Bob? Okay, let's do that.
I'm not sure I can top Trevor's stories, but anyway, I've known Lee a really long time. Goes back many decades to Wayne, New Jersey, and then we both moved to California about the same time. We spent a lot of time together over the years. Trevor, my other son Dylan, and Eric have been good friends since they were born. And they also became friends with Lee and Lee with them. I think Lee may have introduced them to overindulgence, but it could have been me. And I'm not saying that Lee was a bad influence. Lee lives behind a rich mythology. As he told his many stories, he often qualified them as having been based on fact. But if there were exaggerations, it was mostly a matter of degree and not substance, at least as far as I could tell. Lee was a party waiting to happen, and it didn't take much to get him going. A bottle of rum, some Bob Marley, and 2 or more people was 100% going to make for an interesting evening. If the Doors were playing instead of Marley, things tended to get out of hand more easily. Many of my memories with Lee are therefore pretty hazy. There were nights at the Crystal Bay back in Wayne, with Lee proclaiming himself to be a Viking, and therefore not subject to the laws of us mere mortals. At his own bachelor party, Tom, Kathy's brother, and I were trying to hold Lee back from pummeling another friend of ours. He had committed some transgression, and I don't recall what the particular transgression was, but in Lee's defense, this friend committed a lot of them. So Tom and I were each holding on to Lee's arms, one on each side, and Lee said to us, I remember this vividly, "Don't make me hurt you." He then threw us off rather easily, but in the end did no harm to us or to our friend. Even without rum, any time spent with Lee was bound to be interesting. He had an opinion on most things, and if you had a question regarding money, it wouldn't take long before he brought out a pen and yellow legal pad to outline, diagram, and annotate his notes with circles and arrows. It all made perfect sense while he was explaining, but after the fact, it was kind of difficult to make sense of any of it. Lee would always start on a clear, linear path, but then the path kind of became hazy. Lee was a numbers guy. He was a numbers guy, and he knew a lot of things about a lot of different subjects. He was also a maniac in all manner of pursuits, from music to drinking to driving to drinking and driving to working out. He would tell me, "I lifted 335,000 pounds today." So I asked, how did you calculate that? And number of reps times the weight. So say you lift 200 pounds and you do it 200 times, that's 40,000 pounds. So I have no idea how he got to 335,000. But I have no doubt that Lee's math was correct and that he did what he claimed to do. We had a number of hiking and skiing adventures over the years. We alternated concussions, blown knees, and miscellaneous other injuries on our skiing trips. Lee had introduced me to hiking in the SoCal mountains about 40 years ago. On that trip, we hiked up San Gorgonio in a single day. It was about 18 miles round trip with 4,000 feet of elevation gain. I could barely move at one point, but with Lee's coaching and encouragement, I made it. When I reached the summit, the 12-pack of cords that I had been carrying exploded from the altitude change and the constant jarring. Lee said he was going to tell me to leave it behind, but he didn't want to discourage me. Lee claims to have saved my life on a hike up Mount Whitney. We were crossing a creek on a fallen log, and I slipped off and went under. This was about 4:30 in the morning, and it was pitch dark. Lee told me sometime later that he had grabbed my backpack with me attached and lifted me out of the water. In his telling, we were 20 feet upstream from an 80-foot waterfall. I never saw or heard a waterfall, but I'm pretty sure that Lee's story is not, if not entirely factual, it's at least based on fact. We had several hikes in the Sierras after that, including a couple of trips up to Mount Langley. For one of the hikes, Lee had trained especially hard, even though he usually trained for mental toughness, as he put it. On this trip, being the numbers guy that he is, he kept telling Ed and I about how many reps of each particular exercise on which machine he had done, telling us repeatedly that he was made of twisted steel. There was only so much of this that we could take, since it was a fairly difficult hike. And with the exception of Lee, we were definitely feeling it. In the end, we had to shut him up and load him up with 2 gallons of water. And right after that, Lee looked at the map and said, "Hey, we can cut off 2/3 of the remaining distance by going off trail here." There are reasons that they have trails. We were soon climbing in loose shale, and with each step up, we slipped back almost as far as we had moved forward. When we finally reached our destination, Lee set up his tent and passed out. He didn't have dinner, and the next morning, Ed and I got up and had breakfast. Lee still hadn't moved. We hiked up to the summit without Lee, and on the way down, we discussed what we were going to tell Kathy if she had, in fact, died. As we got closer to camp, it became clear that Lee still hadn't moved. And although the sun was pretty strong and the tent must have felt like an oven, so anyway, Lee finally did wake up, and I think he agreed to give Ed $50 for a couple of Tylenol. A few weeks ago, Eric and I were talking about Lee's adventures in Tijuana. Eric said it was one of Lee's favorite stories. I wasn't there myself, but I've heard it enough to know the broad outline of the story. Lee had become separated from Kathy and some other friends, and ended up lost and pounding on doors trying to find a telephone. Eventually, he ended up in the Tijuana drunk tank, where he told his fellow drunks in Spanish, "I am tired. I'm going to sleep now. But I sleep with one eye open, and I see everything. If one of you moves, I will kill you all." Kathy found him in the jail, bellowing and hovering over a bunch of the cowering locals. Tijuana and the rest of the world is a little quieter and sadder now. Lee was a good friend, and I miss him.
And then Melanie, if you'd like to come share, you can now. Right, if you know you'd definitely like to speak, can you raise your hand and then I'll clock where in the room approximately you are? Okay. Okay.
Okay, I'm actually glad to be going where I am going because now everyone has to believe me and knows exactly what I'm talking about. I was thinking about what to say last night about Lee, and the thing that kept coming to mind was storyteller. So not only was he an amazing storyteller, there are plenty of situations happened before I was born that I feel like I was at, such as, you know, when he fought a one-legger in high school, the infamous story. The weekend he got fat at Dave Weckerman's. I don't even know Dave Weckerman, but I feel like I was at that party. But he told, or, you know, how he couldn't eat onions because he was forced to eat onions in hot water? Something that, I don't know if that was true or not, but he was forced to eat that when he was a kid and he couldn't eat them anymore. They could have all been true, I don't know. But he not only told great stories, he supplied great stories. So I just wanted to tell, I guess just a few of mine, or a couple of mine, whatever, that I think everyone can kind of relate to. The first two are from when Kristen and I were newly friends. We became friends freshman year of high school, and I didn't know about her dad's driving. So, you know, I was raised in a family where if you pull up to a stop sign, you do like a 3 count. And I know that's kind of extra, we do the California roll, but I think for Lee, stop signs were sort of a suggestion. So he had picked us up from school. We got called out early so we could go see the new IMAX documentary about Titanic, because it was Titanic Day and that's really important. So he picked us up, he drove us all the way to whatever IMAX there was. Never been so scared of I was white knuckling it in the back seat. I didn't know what to expect. And I remember mentioning it to Kristen. She's like, "Oh yeah, he gets in a few accidents a year." And I'm just, what? And I will say I live in New York now, and those buses, those taxis, I don't even flinch. It's fine. And I was always fine. I'm in one piece. The other one that I thought of that really spoke to him as a character, Kristen and I came home one night, it had to have been in high school, and we walk in and we just see her dad at the sink, but all the lights are off. So it's like, well, what's he doing at the sink? And he's kind of, I'm gonna have to do he had his hand up and he was kind of falling over like that. He was sleep eating chocolate chip cookies. And I've never seen anything like that before or ever since. And I don't think I ever will. And I don't think it was a one-time thing. And there was another story, I didn't even think to tell this, but our friend brought it up, because not only did he provide great stories, he provided great inside jokes. But there was one time I was talking with Lee, talking about, oh, but don't you think this actress is really attractive? I threw out every person I could think of. This was like years ago. I was like, Angelina Jolie, just all these. And he's like, no, they're fine. Do you know who still looks damn good, though? Barbara Hershey. And that's an inside joke, and it will be the rest of my life. She looks damn good. But the main story I want to think of with him is that, like everybody here, you were adopted by Lee. He treated you like family. They took me to Thanksgiving with them. I don't know, we had to have been like 15 or something, to Palm Springs. And great Thanksgiving dinner, totally spoiled. But we had these giant desserts at the end of it, after these giant meals. And it's like, I have like a normal stomach. I'm like, I can't eat more. But Lee had a separate, I'm convinced, like, don't cows have like 4 stomachs? He had an extra stomach for dessert. So all of us, we like could barely touch whatever delicious, beautiful dessert was in front of us. And Lee gets in some conversation with Eric. I think Eric was probably egging him on, like kind of about particle physics, something that made no sense to anybody, astrophysics, particle physics, whatever. And he got really into talking about it. And we all started sliding our desserts around the table in a circle, and Kathy would kind of just put it in front of him, and he would just keep eating while he was talking about whatever he was talking about. And I'm not kidding. Maybe I'm taking on Lee's spirit now. I think he ate like 8 plates of dessert that night. But that was Lee. Some of the best stories I can think of in my life came from that man, and I didn't even have to be there for them. When I went to the house the other night, I thought it was gonna feel empty and odd, like where is he? No, how do, Melanie, anything like that. But I realized that we don't have a finite amount of stories from him. They're infinite because of what a character he was and how much life he brought to everything. And I think everyone knows what I'm talking about. He was a life force all on his own, and that will never truly be gone. And I was so glad to know him. So thank you for letting me speak.
So I think we have at least one person on Zoom who wanted to speak. Is there anyone else in the room who wanted to speak before we go over to Zoom? Anyone? Okay, I see some hands back there. Yeah, Cease, do you want to come up here? Okay.
Try. I'm probably the oldest one that has worked for Lee. And so I have experienced a lot of other things that maybe a lot of other staff have not. We're about the same age, we both grew up in the 60s and 70s. We shared that decade. So some of the things that I'm sorry. I just want to say that I think Kristen covered so much of what Lee was. He was so kind and patient with everybody. If you had a question at work, if you couldn't figure it out, okay, the big pen, I was there when he used the number 2 pencil. Okay, we always had to have a stack of the number 2 pencil, and then he later turned the ballpoint Bic pen, everything he did scratch on, but he also took your adding machine tape, ripped it out, and started scribbling on that. There was other things, and if you had a financial on your, in your desk and you didn't have an extra legal pad, he would start using that to write his computations or help you out if you had a problem. Some of the stories that Lee was so patient with everybody. He always would help you no matter what. If he couldn't help you, he would guide you to something else or someone else that could help you. Some of the stories, when I first started working for him in November of 1989, it was totally a different kind of company. Everybody, it was suit and ties, skirts and blazers, pantyhose. Okay, there was no such thing as casual Friday. That changed, of course, a little later, and then in 1992, it's when he wanted to have, when 89, the company was in 2 suites on Saturn Avenue. Then he wanted the company to be in 1 space, and that's when they moved to Imperial Highway on top of Citizens Bank. And there, everything is what I think Lee wanted the company to be, and I think he did make his dream come true as far as the company he wanted, the staff he wanted. I think everybody that's worked for him has been happy with him. I mean, I can't think of a better boss. He was so patient. He just was so kind. He never had a bad day at work. And speaking of work, I mean, we were professional. There were a couple of times when maybe things were that he could have broken that rule himself, and that's just because he was humble and he just was one of us. Some of the stories that we had at the office were just like he was just one of us. I mean, what boss would you have demonstrate the yoga position of the talk? I can't even remember, but he was down on the floor, downward dog, showing us that, and I thought, okay, well, yeah, that was Lee. There was another instance in the lunchroom where he came in and he was complaining that he had been eating Tums all day because he had a horrible stomach ache stuff. I told him, Lee, I think I have something that will help you. So I came back and gave him these little tablets. Are called Gas-X, and I gave it to him. And so I think Lonnie and Tina and I were in the lunchroom, and we noticed, okay, he's pulling his shirt out of his waistband. I was like, what are you doing, Lee? He said, well, I'm going to put this on my stomach. No, you're supposed to put it on your tongue. That was the instructions. And he is ready to put this little, I don't know. These are things that he was just one of us. He just treated everybody. I mean, we were a family. I just can't explain how, that he's gone. There were so many things that when he would come into my office, and sooner or later, the conversation would go into the era that we both grew up in. We both grew up in the 60s and the 70s, and so that was just a different, even though he was East Coast, I was West Coast, we kind of experienced the same music. He loved Janis Joplin, so did I. In fact, I had just bought him a book or something from Janis Joplin and gave it to him about 2 months ago. And of course, he loved the Doors. He loved Bob Marley, and of course, Bruce Springsteen. There was just different things that we both kind of experienced in the same way because we both were close in age. And I will just never forget him. Sorry. Anyways, yes, he was everything that Kristen said. And I'm just really going to miss him. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Cease. I know there are a few more hands in the back, but sorry, I couldn't see what faces they were attached to. The one that's up right now, I can't see you, but if you'd like to come up. I'm very blind. I don't have my glasses on. Okay, I still can't see who you are. I'll just. Okay, yeah, come on up. Sorry. Gerald. Gerald.
Hi. My name's Gerald. I'm from Anthony and Associates from 1989 to 1994. So in 1989, I started working for Lee. Before working for Lee, I had been a tax auditor in LA, Century City, Beverly Hills, doing a lot of entertainment audits. After that, I became a savings and loan examiner and helped close most of the savings and loans in Orange County. But one thing that I was not an accountant. And I got a job with Lee Anthony, and I didn't know how to do a bank reconciliation. I didn't know how to fill out a payroll tax form. He gave me that opportunity, probably like a lot of people who came through his office. And I'm forever grateful for that. He helped me get my license to become a CPA and also encouraged me to do other things, including business valuations. I used to tell people that I gave Lee the 6 best years of my life. But looking back on it, he gave me the 6 best years of my life. I'm very grateful for that. I probably have a lot of stories, but I'll just mention a couple things. One time I was at a meeting with Lee. We had a meeting with the bonding company and a client. And Lee was so focused on that meeting when we came out that we were talking about it on the way home. He asked me, "Do you want to stop and get lunch?" And I said, "Sure." So we got out, went to go eat. He came back to the car. He couldn't find his keys. They were still in the ignition. The car was running. He had been so focused on the meeting that he forgot about that. He also told me he went to Woodstock. He didn't remember anything. I have no story to tell there. Thank you.
I'm very short, aren't I? Short and blind. So I think we're going to switch over to Zoom for a moment, and I know there are still some hands in the room, but my dad's cousin, Jim Frieswick in New Jersey, I believe, would like to speak, so we're going to switch over to Zoom. There might be an adjustment. We'll see.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, my name's Jim Frieswick. I'm calling from Wayne, New Jersey. Lee was my cousin. Our mothers were sisters. My mother was born in Passaic, New Jersey in April of 1919. And she was 4 years older than Lee's mother, who was born in Passaic, New Jersey in April of 1923. Our mothers were the daughters of William Wilson and Margaret Ross Wilson, who emigrated from Scotland to Passaic, New Jersey in 1912.
No, sorry, just a second. Thank you for your patience. Just a second. So Jim just lost his connection. I guess Wi-Fi is bad in New Jersey. So I know there was another hand in the back. I think there was another hand attached to a human over there who wanted to speak. Was there not? Okay. Oh, I see. There we go. Okay. Come on up, Robert. Okay.
Hey, my name's Robert Dan. For those of you who don't know me, I grew up with Eric from 1995 on. I've known the Anthony family since then, and it's been a pleasure all around. Eric and I are best friends, and I love that. And Lee has been a big contributor of that. Friendship with Lee, man, that guy was not only a role model to me, but an actual friend. And that's how he would have liked to have been seen, is just one of my friends. Even though he was elder, he was just an actual friend. And I love him for that. There was no age gap there. He was just that. There came a time where my dad passed away in 2003 in an accident, and Lee and the Anthony family were there for me. It was a really rough time on me and my family, and Lee and the Anthony family stood out during that time, which meant the world to the Dan family, my brother sitting over there and my mom who's here, and we all appreciate that to the Anthony family. Your dad is the one who has been a guidance in my life since my dad has been gone, and a role model / mentor to me as far as what perseverance through life's difficulties and the meanings of life and what they mean and how you can combat them to become your own person. Lee was just that. He also showed me what the meaning of true love is. The meaning of true love is to just an unconditional thing that you give on a daily basis and you almost do without reckoning. That's what his love was to Kathy. And I applaud him for that, because he has shown me so many things in life that life has not shown me without his presence. There was a time where recently we went to Alaska, and it was the Alaska trip of, I think, a 2012 or 2011, 2012. Yep, where we went to Alaska, and we were really giddy on getting there, so everybody was drinking a little bit. Lee was our designated DUI driver, and within 3 hours, we got pulled over and Lee got arrested. We had to wait him out until he, his blood alcohol content was less enough where he could drive. But I remember when we pulled up to the jail, and Eric jokingly said, have you guys tased him enough? Do we need to tase him again to get him out? And Lee came out, we picked him up, and we continued our trip. Regardless, the mistakes you make in life aren't those examples. Lee was an example of showing us what life means and that fine line between fun and responsibility. And he was the perfect example of that. And I will love him for that. I miss my good friend Lee. I feel sorry for the Anthony family, Kristen, Kathy, Eric, and Alyssa, and Tom. I love you guys to death. and I wish you guys the best. I know what it's like to lose a dad, and I just wish you guys the best. Thank you very much.
So we do have another Zoom speaker who are going to go over to Zoom for Doc Mintz. I believe a friend from my dad's high school. Yeah.
Unmute. There we go. Yeah, I heard you, Jim, so we'll get to you next. I was a junior high and high school classmate of Lee, along with Rick and Stu, who were with us. And I just remember watching Lee get in and out of trouble all the time. And here's an example. I believe it was Mr. Pearson's calculus class. Lee and I had a game we called 4D tic-tac-toe, but we played it on paper. And we'd sit next to each other in calculus class until we made too much noise and got separated. So we were at separate parts of the classroom, but we worked out a system of hand signals of, you know, where our next move would go. And somewhere we got our signals crossed. Lee is motioning like he won, and I'm going, no, you didn't. And we're having this argument with our hands back and forth. And who gets kicked out of class? Me. Lee got, you know, scot-free. So Lee always seems to get out of these jams very easily. After high school, we lost touch, but he became my accountant because I needed one. And I'm going to miss that once a year, that call, Doc, how do? I'll miss him a lot. Rest in peace, Lee.
Thank you, Doc. And then I know Jim is back online, so I think we're going to try there again on Zoom, back on Zoom. Fingers crossed.
Thank you, Kristen. Yeah, the electricity in my apartment went out and knocked down my computer. Sorry about that. A little storm went through Wayne, New Jersey. As I was saying, Lee and I were cousins. We were first cousins because our mothers were sisters. My mother was Muriel and his mother was Nora. And they were the daughters of William Wilson and Margaret Ross Wilson, who emigrated from Scotland to Passaic, New Jersey in 1912. But on his father's side, Lee was descended from John Anthony, an Englishman who emigrated to the Boston area in 1634. And then by 1640, he had moved to Rhode Island, where members of the Anthony family still reside. His father, Albert Anthony, was from that Anthony family in Rhode Island. You know, a few years ago, Lee told me that I was his oldest friend, and Lee was my oldest friend. I was born on March 19th, 1950, and Lee was born 8 months later on November 15th, 1950. At that time, we were living in a two-family house at 38 Barclay Avenue in Clifton, New Jersey. Lee had the top apartment and I had the bottom apartment. One of the earliest memories I have of my cousin Lee is when I was about 2 years old, maybe 3. Lee was probably about 2. And we were playing on our tricycles in front of the house on a concrete landing in front of 38 Barclay Avenue. And I had the bright idea to crash my tricycle into his tricycle, which I did, and Lee retaliated. He crashed his tricycle into mine, and this went back and forth a few times, and finally, at one point, my teeth landed on the handlebars of Lee's tricycle. Came in contact. So when Lee pulled back, he pulled one of my front teeth out and it fell to the ground. And I'll never forget the look on Lee's face. It was sort of like, uh-oh. And so I picked up the tooth and brought it in, and his mother and my mother were sitting there in the kitchen, and I handed my tooth to my mother and said, "Would you save this?" And she ended up saving it, and I found it in an envelope in one of her drawers after she died in 2004 at the age of 85. Another early memory I have of my cousin Lee, when I was about 7 years old and Lee was about 6. He had since moved to Wayne, New Jersey in 1956, but I was still living in Clifton at 38 Barclay Avenue. So he and his mom came down to Clifton for a visit, and Lee brought his bicycle, and it still had the training wheels on it. And I decided that we were going to go for a bike ride. So I led the way, and Lee followed me. We went down Barclay Avenue to the end, made a right onto Main Ave, followed that through Clifton to the city of Passaic, traveled through Passaic, then through another section of Clifton, which was on the other side of Passaic, and finally into the township of Nutley, New Jersey. And I knew it was Nutley because I stopped at a park bench and it said on it, Nutley, New Jersey. And we waited around a couple of minutes to catch our breaths, and turned around and went back home. We had ridden our bicycles about 5 miles one way to Nutley, and so the return trip made it a 10-mile bike trip. 7 years old, 6 years old. That was one of Lee's early adventures. More were to come, as all of you know. And by the way, let me say that I just thought that Kristen's eulogy was just terrific. And I really appreciate everyone who's spoken here tonight. Or actually, it's in the afternoon where you are in California. It's obvious that Lee touched a lot of lives, and that he was appreciated by all who met him. One thing I could say about Lee, I cannot recall Lee ever having said anything bad about anybody, which is unusual because usually his life, but I can't remember Lee ever doing it. And he often said good things about people that he knew. But I can't remember him ever saying a bad word about anybody. I don't know whether you heard about his great adventure when he was 7 years old in 1958. He and his friend Dave Reynolds got together one morning. Dave Reynolds had $5 that his mother had given to him to go to the dentist right down the street. Dr. Green was the dentist. His office is right down at the end of Rose Terrace at the corner of Valley Road. Well, at about 10:30 a.m., Dave's mother discovered that Dave had missed his 9:30 a.m. appointment, and he let Mrs. Anthony know. And Lee's mother and Dave's mother went around the neighborhood looking for Lee and Dave, couldn't find them. They did not return for lunch. They had not returned by 3 p.m. that afternoon, at which point the mothers were frantic and they called the police. Several hundred police, volunteer firemen, and skin divers from Wayne and 5 nearby municipalities began searching for Lee and Dave. Skin divers searched Little Pond on Valley Road and several other local bodies of water. My father and Lee's Uncle Gordon, who was the brother of Lee's mother, went out searching for Lee in Uncle Gordon's car. My father suggested that they look at the Totowa Drive-In Theater on Route 46 East in Totowa, New Jersey, one municipality over from Wayne. And Uncle Gordon drove them there, and lo and behold, that's where they found Lee and Dave. at 10:15 p.m. that evening, some 13 hours after they had left their houses at 9:30 in the morning. They had used Dave's $5, not for the dentist, but to buy a fishing rod, something to eat, and tickets to the drive-in theater, where a World War II movie was playing entitled A Time to Love and a Time to Die. Lee and Dave had walked 4.5 miles to get to the Totowa Drive-In Theater. I don't know if they ever intended to come back, but they were found and they were driven home. I like to tell another story. I hope I'm not taking too much time. Probably am. I'd like to tell another story about the time that our parents took us to the Black Bear restaurant. We were little. We were maybe 6 or 7 years old. I used to love the Black Bear restaurant. I think it was in the city of Clifton. I loved it because when you entered the restaurant, there was this big black bear in a glass enclosure. It was either a real stuffed black bear or a fake black bear. I don't know which, but I thought it was really cool. And also that restaurant was noted for its hash brown potatoes, which were served with dinner, not breakfast. So our two families were seated there at a big rectangular table. And I got the bright idea during dinner to put a pea on a spoon and fling it at Lee. And it got him. And Lee retaliated by flinging a pea back at me. And this went back and forth a couple times before our parents put a stop to it. But I think we went through a second round of the pea fight before it finally ended. And our parents never forgot that pea fight, never let us forget about it. And I'm sure the owner of the restaurant never forgot our families. One day we were in our early 20s, and we went to Chris's restaurant in Packanack Lake. It may have been called the Waterfront by then. We went in for some burgers and beers. And when the waitress gave us our burgers, Lee grabbed the ketchup bottle, and he was in the habit at that time of shaking it in order to shake up the ketchup so it would come out easy when he poured it on his burger. Well, he made the mistake of not checking to see whether the cap was on tight enough. So when he shook it in his hand over his right hand shoulder, the cap flew off, and a big glob of ketchup flew out and hit the guy in the back who was sitting in the booth behind us. Well, we were too afraid to say anything, and we didn't. And we just finished our burgers and beer and walked out of the place with the guy sitting there with the ketchup on his back. One night when I was home from college, my mother got a call from Lee's mother saying that Lee was at the police station in Suffern, New York, and she was going to go pick him up. And my mother said, no, Jimmy can pick him up. And I did. I drove up to Suffern, New York, and he was there with Dave Weckerman, his good friend. Well, apparently Lee and Dave had come upon a bicycle gang. And they got beat up pretty good. And Lee's front tooth was kicked out or punched out. And I picked them both up and drove them back home to Wayne. Thereafter, Lee obtained a partial denture to replace his missing front tooth. And for the next 12 years, he made people laugh by showing how he could use his tongue to make his front tooth go out and back in. Let me see if I can think of some other story I can tell you. Well, the summer of '67, Lee, Rick Minervini, Stu Mann, and I took a bus to Montreal, Canada for Expo 67, the World's Fair. And we stayed at a French convent and hitchhiked to Expo 67. Minervini and Mann can fill you in on the details of that adventure, but my memories are that we bought a case of beer and walked it back to the convent. And I spoke a little French because I took French in high school. I was able to tell the nuns, fermez la porte, knock on my door to wake us up the next day so we'd be able to get over to the World's Fair in time. I remember we were hitchhiking and we got picked up by this guy who drove on a highway, a major highway. The cars were going in excess of 50 miles per hour. And he missed the turnoff to the World's Fair. So he stopped his car in the lane of traffic and he backed up. I couldn't believe it. Canadian drivers. But I'm sure Minervini and Mann can tell you a little bit more about that adventure that we had. Let's see. In 1958, Lee and I saw a movie, and it was called The Vikings. And it starred Kirk Douglas and Tony Curtis. And that was one of Lee's favorite movies. And I think a lot of times Lee fantasized about being a Viking, but he loved that movie. And a couple of his favorite books were The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. He also liked science fiction books. Let's see. My family moved to the Pines Lake section of Wayne in 1960 when I was 10 years old. Although Lee and I were in the same grade, we attended different elementary and junior high schools. But we were both sophomores at Wayne Senior High School for the 65-66 school year. The next year, the new Wayne Hills High School opened, and I transferred to that school for my junior and senior years because I lived on the other side of Ratzer Road. Lee stayed at the old high school, which was renamed Wayne Valley High School. So I graduated with the Wayne Hills class of 68, and Lee graduated with the Wayne Valley class of 68. But sometimes the classes had combined high school reunions. Our first combined reunion was the 20th year reunion on April 30th, 1988. That was held at the Tides in North Halden. I organized that reunion for Wayne Hills. Lee attended. I don't think Lee ever missed a combined high school reunion. He may also not have ever missed one of his Wayne Valley class of 68 non-combined reunions. I'm not sure. I know he attended a lot of high school reunions, and that's when we always hooked up for more adventures when he, came back to New Jersey for those high school reunions. As a matter of fact, the last time I saw Lee was in October of 2018 when I dropped him off at the Newark airport for his return flight to California. He had been in New Jersey for the 50th year combined Wayne Hills, Wayne Valley classes of 68 reunion that was held in Totowa, New Jersey on October 13th, 2018. After Lee moved to California, we didn't see each other as often as we had when he and Kathy resided in the Manchester Apartments off Valley Road in Wayne. But we spoke on the phone from time to time over the years, and we got together, like I said, when he returned for high school reunions or whenever he returned to visit his in-laws or his parents. And on a couple times when he returned to New Jersey to bury the ashes of his mother and his brother at Lodi Cemetery in New Jersey. I drove cross country a couple of times to visit Lee, Kathy, Eric, and Kristen at their home in Brea, California in 1988 and again in 1990. And Lee and Kathy were gracious enough to allow me to stay at their house both times. I stayed for about a month each time. Many times when Lee and I would talk, we would talk politics. Both of us were early supporters of Barack Obama for president. We both supported Hillary Clinton when she ran against Donald Trump. And I'm sure Lee would have been very happy if he had lived to see Joe Biden defeat Donald Trump. We all know that Lee was devoted to his wife, Kathy, and his children, Eric and Kristen. He often told me that Kristen and Eric were wonderful children. And I know he was devoted to his CPA firm, which he started in California some 35 years ago. Lee found his calling when he became a certified public accountant because he had always been good with numbers. Lee made many good business acquaintances over the years, and he made many good new friends out there in California. He had many, he remained friends with his many good friends from New Jersey, such as, among others, Rick Minervini, Jack LaForge, Dave Weckerman, Mart Snook, Dave Timoney, Norm Doc Mintz, Stu Mann, Bill Lawrence, Bob Levine, and Ed Binns. And there were many more.
Okay. And I know we have, yes, I know we have at least one more speaker in the room, which is my husband, Tom. Thank you. Okay. And then if there's no one else in the room or on Zoom who would like to speak after Tom, then my brother Eric will make the, and there's an arm waving. Okay, after Tom. Okay, yeah.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Jim. For those of you tonguing the bottom of your glass with the ice, please feel free to go to the bar, go to the loo. That's toilet in American. And dinner will be served at 6. I thought I couldn't come here today without at least trying to share a story with you guys. After all, I am the son-in-law, and a lot of gentlemen in here know what it means to meet the in-laws for the first time. But what is it like meeting Lee Anthony for the first time? It was 2012. I was visiting California for the first time. Kristen was on tour with an arena show, the Batman Live arena show. I know, there's a lot to unpack there. Tina went to that. But Kristen wasn't in town at the time, so there was going to be a couple of days where she wasn't going to be there, and Lee was going to pick me up from the airport. A terrifying notion, as it is, having not met the father-in-law before. So I arrive at LAX, and he's there meeting me. Hey, Tom, how do? Lee Anthony. Very formal handshake. And then we had the long ride back to Brea. It was about a 45-minute drive. By the end of the drive, I knew everything there was to know about Wayne, New Jersey, how to eat a slice of pizza properly, if you want to knock out a guy, you got to get in behind the jawbone. It's a great thing to hear from a prospective father-in-law on a ride from the airport. But, you know, he couldn't have been friendlier, kinder, nicer. But little did I know I had an initiation on my hands. So Eric was in town as well, and when I got back to the house, Lee said to me, "Hey Tom, in the morning we're thinking of going for a hike. You wanna join?" I was like, "Yeah, sure. Yeah, I like hikes. I love hikes." Now, for those of you who don't know, if you've been to the UK, a hike for us typically means a leisurely stroll through a field, and then you're in the pub by lunchtime. So I'm like, yeah, I'll go on a hike. At like 3 o'clock in the morning, he wakes me up. "Hey Tom, you better start getting ready. We got a bit of a drive ahead of us." And I was like, "Okay, fine." I grabbed my carry-on backpack. I was like, this will be fine. Running shoes, flimsy running shoes. Going down to the kitchen, he's like, "Okay, Tom, you're going to need some water. Better get some from the kitchen." Okay, fine. Grab 3 small bottles of water. He's like, "I don't know, you're going to need a few more than that." And I was like, okay. He puts in 16 bottles, small bottles of water. So yeah, it can get pretty hot in the afternoon. I was like, it's gonna get that hot? Okay. So then we start driving. Eric, Lee, and I get in the car, and we get on the freeway. We get a breakfast burger from Jack in the Box, or Carl's Jr., I can't remember. And we're hitting the road, and then we're driving for quite a while, and then suddenly Lee all of a sudden turns back to me and he goes, "Hey, Tom, you see those 3 mountains in the distance there? Yeah. You see that big one in the middle? Yeah. We're going up that." I was like, "Oh, how high is that?" It's about 10,000 feet. Oh, okay. How long's that gonna take? Well, it's okay. It's 11 o'clock right now, but it's probably about five hours to the summit and 3 hours down. Okay, so I had a hike on my hands, and now meanwhile Eric's talking. I'm terrified at this point, and I'm thinking, I haven't trained. I've never been up a mountain before. I'm British, so I'm like a wet blanket. I buckle under pressure. This is terrible. Eric's then saying to Lee, "So Dad, have you been training for this?" And he's like, "I've been working on my mental toughness." Didn't know what that meant. Sounded also terrifying. But anyway, what I didn't know is that, thankfully, Lee's mental toughness set the pace for that hike pretty nicely. It was quite slow. So it allowed me to really take in the scenery. I fell in love with California at that point. I fell in love with hiking. I sort of got ushered into the clan of hikers in the room with the Levines and the Binses. And I got to see kind of the world that Lee was in love with, and I fell in love with it too. And I have some wonderful videos, panoramic videos of California. Meanwhile, with Eric going, "Dad, drink some Gatorade," and him going, in the background. But so by the time we got up to the top of the mountain, we were all exhausted, Lee especially. His knee was killing him. And he's like, I'm gonna actually go down now because I gotta get a head start because my knee's killing me. And Eric wanted to stay behind and enjoy the sunset. So Lee left, and then I followed him about 20 minutes afterwards, and then Eric was left behind. At this point, it was about 8, 9 o'clock. It was starting to get pretty dark, and I hadn't seen Lee or Eric in hours. Somehow, I got phone reception at that point, and Kristen started calling me in hysterics after having heard from Eric briefly saying, "We're on Baldy, Dad's nowhere to be seen, I don't know where Tom is." So Kristen's perspective was that her dad and her brother took her boyfriend on his first hike and just lost him on the mountainside. But lo and behold, I ended up catching up with Lee not too long afterwards. Eric caught up. And at this point, I'm really nervous because Kristen's mad at me, and I'm like, "Oh, God, how am I going to explain? Okay, we just need to get back quick. We just need to get back to the house. There's no reception at this point." We get down to the bottom of the mountain. I'm ready to put my stuff in the car. And Lee goes, "Well, I'm pretty beat, but it's like 9 o'clock. I think I deserve a rum and coke." So we walk into the bar at the bottom of Mount Baldy and proceed to have several rum and cokes and a cheeseburger with no signal whatsoever. And we didn't get home until, 11 o'clock, midnight or something? But that was my first introduction to Lee Anthony. We went on several hikes afterwards. But just to take, a slightly more serious note, I think as a CPA you get some kind of, medal for allowing your daughter to marry a man with a bachelor's in acting. And I'm sure many clients in the room here probably know perfectly well who I am, just because Lee was probably just terrified at what that meant. But But he is a man who has inspired me beyond measure. He speaks a language that I don't speak, that a lot of us barely speak. But his wisdom, he became essentially a father figure to me. And even though I only knew him for 8 years, I felt such acceptance from him, such understanding. Like many people have said here, there wasn't a judgmental bone in his body. And the fact that he entrusted me with one of his most prized possessions, his daughter, is a debt I can never repay to him. And I always wanted to. And I hope that just in the days he had left, I hope he knew how much I loved him, how much he inspired me, and how his daughter is in the best of hands. And Lee, I love you. I wish you were here. He'd probably be right there, bored as hell as I'm talking, talking the ear off the bartender. But we all wish you were here, and we love you, Lee. Thank you.
Oh, this is very tall, and I'm very short. We have one more speaker, Doreen Dan, if you'd like to come speak, and then my brother Eric will make the final remarks. I really quickly want to say, while Doreen's walking up here, that we were donated an insanely beautiful cake from Billy Skeffington. So thank you, Billy, so much. I think it's just thank you. I think maybe next to rum and Coke, what my dad loved most was cake, and it is such a beautiful tribute, so thank you so much. Thank you so much. There you are. Thank you, guys. And then Doreen.
I'm following my son, Robert. We're neighbors to the Anthonys. We live just a couple of doors down from them. We met Kathy and Lee in 1994 as we were purchasing our home in Brea, and they were the first neighbors to extend themselves to us and tell us about their gardener and how great she was. Over the years, my son Robert and Eric became best friends, and they were on the golf team together and became very close. When they graduated from high school, Lee's family offered Robert to join them for a vacation to Belize, and it was a trip of a lifetime for Robert. We worried for him to go out of state, and particularly without us, and out of the country for that matter, but as I said, he had a wonderful time, and they were wonderful to him. When we lost my late husband in 2003, Lee became, as Robert said, a mentor, a friend, a confidant to Robert. He meant the world to Robert. Recently, Lee and I spoke outside as we were getting our mail, and we stopped to talk with each other. And we actually shared memories of our children growing up and their aspirations and our thoughts about them. And he was so complimentary of his children, Eric and Kristen. He was so proud of everything they'd accomplished. He spoke of you, Kristen, and your academic pursuits. We shared our daughter's grade school experiences and how wonderful it was to see them achieve their dreams academically, and particularly for you with your doctorate. I've always been impressed over the years by how much Lee was in love with his dear wife, Kathy. Mike and I were high school sweethearts. And I was always in love with him and loved his devotion to me. To see Lee's love for Kathy ever since we met him in 1994 was inspiring. And I know that God will give Kathy strength as he has given me to survive these coming days, months, and years. And I'm glad we're neighbors and that our sons, including my younger son, Ryan, are family to each other. And I wish I had used Lee as my CPA, but even more so that he and Kathy are my friends. Happy birthday, Lee. We love you.
And then my brother will be making there's that insanely beautiful cake. My brother has some final words, but just before he speaks, I just want to say thank you again to everyone in this room and on Zoom. It means so much to us. I just can't say thank you enough. So thank you for being here.
All right, well, happy birthday, Dad. 70 years old today. It's a big year and a much bigger party than I think he expected for his 70th, so I can only imagine the gratitude and pride he would have felt to have everyone here, you know, more than 100 of his closest friends and family. And I can only imagine how thankful he would be for everybody to be here and get to witness this. So I know that I can speak on his behalf and say thank you all for the outpouring of support for our family during this time and the camaraderie that we have all shared throughout our lives and throughout this journey we shared together. So thank you all. He would be so happy to see us here celebrating his life. So as you all know, my dad was a storyteller, and I doubt much of his history will be news to anyone, but a speech at his funeral from his son would be incomplete without mention of his family, my grandparents, Al, his father, who was an engineer, Nora, his mother, who was a nurse, and Gordon, his brother, who was paralyzed at the age of 16, but a rather influential man and one of my dad's biggest inspirations in life. So Dad grew up in New Jersey, where he spent most of his scholastic years trying to minimize his efforts in class and rarely doing homework, but acing all of his tests. And he actually scored the highest SAT score in his Tri-County area as a junior in high school. And he was competitive at the state level in wrestling as well. After high school, he found his way into more trouble than most, well, which is an understatement, but more trouble than most, and could tell stories for hours about crashing cars, evading arrest, getting thrown out of bars, and amassing what he liked to say his self-proclaimed street fighting record of 198, 0, and 2. After meeting and marrying my mom, he calmed down dramatically, or dramatically for him anyway, and tried to only misbehave like that a couple times a year. He loved to travel. He biked across Europe for 6 months in his early 20s on a whim. He climbed Mount Kilimanjaro for his 40th birthday, which is the highest mountain on the African continent. And he took our family all over the world, he and my mom did, while we grew up, including places in the Caribbean, Australia, the English Isles, Belize, Fiji, Ecuador, and of course his favorite place, Jamaica. As is evident by the slideshows this afternoon, many of our fondest memories took place in our travels and in our escapades, snorkeling, scuba diving, partying with the locals, and of course drinking rum. Dad always took it upon himself, if he thought at all possible, to drink all of the rum that any of those little bars had, and sometimes tried to drink all of the rum on the entire island if the island was small enough, and he got a big kick out of that. You all know he had a very loud and infectious laugh, and He loved depleting these small islands' bars from supplies. But he was also very compassionate in our travels and loved getting to know the local people. And he would exchange stories with them and share stories about his life and listen to stories about their lives. And he would build friendships with these people that would last years in between our trips, and they would remember him. So I could tell and will tell stories about my dad for the rest of my life. And in his style, weave fact and fiction together in a perfect balance to accurately recall an event with just enough embellishment to make the audience feel the intensity of the situation. To me, my dad was a legend. He is my hero, and he is larger than life. His stories inspire me and guide me through my life. I will always take with me his bravery, his intelligence, his wisdom, and his love for everyone around him. And in that vein, I'll share a quick story that personifies the attributes we all cherish most about him. Kristen touched on this one a little bit, but it goes back a long time. We were probably 8 and 5, I would say. It was even when Bill and Carrie were new to the business. And Dad was called to testify in a murder trial for one of his clients, and obviously an accountant is not the most critical witness in a murder trial, but Dad was cognizant of the associated risks, so he decided to buy an alarm system for the house, and just in case. So with that in mind, one night we were watching TV, laying in bed, and the alarm goes off, and Dad instantly jumps out of bed and punches a hole in the upstairs window of his bedroom and rips the glass out and instructs Kristen and Mom and I to jump out onto the awning and, if we need to, run. And we stood there on the awning like, what the hell is going on, and really didn't do much. And eventually Dad came back upstairs bleeding like crazy from this giant shard of glass that he had grabbed to run downstairs with in defense. And he realized that no one was down there, and as we were bandaging up his hands, we realized Kristen had pressed the button to the alarm by accident. And this was a false alarm. And Dad wasn't even a little bit mad. He was just happy that everything was okay, and I think a little bit he was kind of stoked that he got to show us that he was willing to do something like that. But he wasn't crazy, because in the following days, a potential person that was supposed to testify at that trial actually showed up dead later on. So my dad was not entirely crazy either. So he, so it's just kind of a story that represents his bravery and intelligence and foresight and love for our family. And there are more stories about my dad than I could ever share in one speech, and as we all have. And as we retell them, we will always remember his insight and his broad and deep knowledge, his wild side, and his love for those around him. We'll all miss his advice, his confidence, his kindness and morality, his vision and his values, and certainly his storytelling as well. But remember, and take this from a fisherman, a good story never gets old. It just grows and gets better with time. So share Dad's stories and his life lessons with those around you. In the words of Steve Jobs, the most powerful person in the world is a storyteller. The storyteller sets the vision, the values, and the agenda of an entire generation that is to come. So I ask that we all share these stories forever and let him live on. In the words of Babe Ruth, heroes get remembered and legends never die. Thank you all.
Thank you guys so much. Dinner is going to be served, not to anyone on Zoom, unfortunately. So if you're on Zoom, thank you guys so much for joining us. And then everyone in the room, stick around for dinner. Thank you.
edge of town. Ride the King's Highway. Weird scenes inside the gold mine. Ride the highway west, baby. Ride the snake. Ride the snake to the lake.